I would like to remind Gerrit of Revelation 22, where it says, I warn everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book, if anyone adds to them, God will add to him the plagues described in this book. So let's have a look at Matthew 24, verse 45, and see what it actually says. What I want you to do is to take yourself back to the first century. You're sitting on the Mount of Olives. It's spring, so it's not cold, but it's not too hot either. And you're listening to what Jesus has to say. And he has just told you of the awful things that are about to happen in Jerusalem and at the end of the world. And it's a bit frightening. And then he says to you that he wants you to keep on the watch. Keep that in mind, because then he goes on to say, verse 45, who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant when his master will find him doing so when he comes. You're sitting there and you think to yourself, I want to be a faithful and wise servant. I want to be encouraging to my fellow Christians because we're going to go through the most awful of times. I want to help them to carry on enduring. And I also want to do what it says in Isaiah chapter 50, and verse 4. It says, the Lord God has given me the tongue of those who are taught, that I may know how to sustain with a word him who is weary. I want to be the sort of person who can encourage someone who's tired, who's finding it difficult to endure. I don't want to be like the evil slave that Jesus then talked about. That slave said to himself, my master is delaying. That wicked slave did not have in mind the end of the world. He was not keeping on the watch. So he said to himself, oh, there's a long time yet. I need to live in comfort until it comes, so I will beat my fellow slaves, make them give me money, so I can live in comfort. We don't want to be like that. When you heard Jesus' words about a faithful and wise servant, you would not have thought to yourself, oh, I must go and get one or two others, and what we'll do is we'll lord it over our brothers, and we will tell them what they can and cannot do. You couldn't possibly have construed that meaning from Jesus' words. So, were the apostles in Jerusalem a governing body? Now we know that Paul and a few others went up to Jerusalem to ask about the question of circumcision. Did the Gentiles need to get circumcised as prescribed by the law of Moses? Now Peter, he read from the Hebrew scriptures the prophecy that Gentiles would become followers of Jesus Christ and would turn to God. So he said, I don't want to give them a pile of do's and don'ts, but there are a few necessary things, and that's all. He said, they were not to eat foods polluted by idols, or they were to keep free from idolatry. They were to be free from immorality, and they weren't to eat blood. Where did Peter get those laws from? Well, the one on blood came from the days of Noah. Mankind were allowed to eat meat, but they had to respect the life of the animal. Life is sacred, and to remember that, God said you must pour out the blood. It's sacred. The laws on idolatry and immorality Peter got from Jesus Christ and from the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah. It was left then to the Apostle Paul to explain in greater detail why the law of Moses did not apply to Christians. They were under the law of Christ. Neither the word nor the thought of a governing body ever existed in the scriptures. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 24, he said, we do not lord it over your faith. Some translations say we're not dictators of your faith. He goes on to say, We work with you for your joy so that you can stand firm in your faith. Were the early apostles faithful and wise servants? They most certainly were. The Apostle Peter wrote letters to encourage us. So did John and Matthew, and so on. The disciples, Luke and Mark, were not apostles, but they too were wise servants and gave us Gospels and the book of Acts. We can be most grateful that these ones were so wise to give us good spiritual food. So we too would like to be faithful and wise servants. Going back to Matthew 24, remember that the evil slave said to himself, "My master is delaying." Now Watchtower claims, yes, they say we're in the last days, it's coming any minute, but their actions do not go along with their words. They say we're in the last days, but then we want to do this building work, we want all this money, we want to set up systems in order to look after all this money that we've got a pile of building work to do. Do they actually believe that we are in the last days? Or are they like the evil slave who said, "My master is delaying"? Well, we don't want to be like that. In being faithful and wise servants, we remember Jesus' words in Luke 22. He said, "Let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves." And he gives the illustration. Who is greater, the one who resides at the table or the one who serves? If you have a waiter, the waiter goes and gets what you want. The one who reclines at the table and eats the food is greater than the one who serves. And that's the sort of attitude that we want. We're not here to govern our brothers and sisters, but rather to help one another endure to the end. And with God's blessing, we will do that. Take care now.